Anna sat in the parlor, her heart heavy in her chest. Her father's voice boomed across the room, the words cutting through the silence like a knife. "It's settled, Anna. You'll marry Thomas. It's the right thing to do." Her mother, seated beside him, nodded in agreement. "It's practical. Margaret would understand. She wants this for you, for the family." Anna glanced at Thomas. He was seated across from her, his eyes downcast, the lines of his face tight with discomfort. He didn't meet her gaze, didn't speak, as if he, too, was a prisoner in this decision. Anna's stomach churned. Her sister, Margaret, had been dead just 3 months. And now, her family was asking her to take her place, to marry the man who had shared her sister's bed, the same man who had held Margaret's hand as she lay dying, whispering promises of love and loyalty. "I haven't agreed to this," Anna said softly, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. "No one's asked me." Her father's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "It's not about asking, Anna. It's about keeping the farm in the family. You need a home, and Thomas needs a wife. This is how it's done." Anna's breath caught. Her father's words were so cold, so final. She could feel the weight of Margaret's absence pressing down on her chest, the ghost of her sister lingering in the room. Margaret had been the kindest person Anna had ever known, and now, in death, she was being forced to wear her sister's life like a borrowed coat. It wasn't fair. "I won't be her," Anna whispered, barely able to speak the word aloud. "I'm not Margaret. I'm not a replacement." But her father didn't seem to hear her. He went on, as if she hadn't spoken at all. "The farm stays in the family, Anna. We need you to do this. It's for everyone's good. It's what Margaret would have wanted." Margaret's words echoed in Anna's mind, her last breath a soft plea. "Take care of them, Annie." She had promised. She had promised to care for their parents, to help hold the family together. But this was not what Margaret would have wanted. This was not how Anna imagined her life unfolding. She wasn't just a woman who could take over her sister's role. She was her own person, with her own hopes and dreams. Dreams that were being crushed beneath the weight of family duty. That night, Anna sat alone in her room, surrounded by Margaret's belongings. She hadn't yet been able to pack up her sister's things, unable to erase the last traces of the life Margaret had lived. A soft breeze stirred the curtains, the smell of wildflowers drifting in through the open window. Margaret had always loved those flowers. Anna's hand brushed over the locket Margaret had worn every day, now lying on the small wooden table by the window. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. It felt like an anchor, a reminder of the sister who had meant everything to her. Her father's justification played over and over in her mind. "Thomas needs a wife. You need a home." But did it really have to be like this? Was this the only choice she had? 6 days. She had 6 days before the wedding. 6 days to find a way out, or be trapped forever in a life that wasn't hers. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She could see her sister's face in the glass. The same dark hair, the same sharp eyes. They looked so alike that sometimes it was hard to tell them apart. Her family didn't see Anna. They saw Margaret. That was all they had ever seen. It wasn't enough to be Anna. No one had ever really asked her what she wanted, what she needed. Anna closed her eyes, the weight of the world settling on her shoulders. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the life she wanted. And in just 6 days, her fate would be sealed. The sound of her father's voice echoed through the house, his commands ringing in her ears. But in that moment, Anna realized something else, something that scared her more than anything else. She had to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. But how could she choose when it felt like everyone else was making the decision for her? 6 days. That was all she had. Anna looked at the wedding dress her mother had been making, the white fabric draped across the chair, and felt her stomach twist. 6 days to find a way out, or be forced into a life that wasn't hers. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was deafening. Anna stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. 6 days. She had 6 days to find a way out, or she'd spend the rest of her life being her sister's ghost. The market was bustling, the scent of fresh-baked bread and roasting meat hanging in the air as townsfolk haggled over wares and shared gossip. Anna tried to ignore the chatter around her, focusing on the basket in her hands as she made her way past the stalls. But the whispers were impossible to escape. "Poor Thomas," one woman whispered, glancing at Anna with pity. "At least Anna can step into Margaret's place. Keep the farm in the family. It's practical." Another woman chimed in, her voice low. "I heard she was always envious of Margaret anyway. Must be easier to be the pretty one after the other's gone." Anna felt a knot form in her stomach, the cruel words sinking into her like a weight she couldn't shake off. Her hand tightened around the handle of the basket, and before she knew it, the apples she'd been holding tumbled from it, rolling across the ground. "Oh, dem," Anna muttered under her breath, bending down to collect them. As she reached for one apple, a rough hand shot out and caught it mid-roll. Looking up, she saw a man standing there, his face unfamiliar, but his eyes soft with concern. "Here," he said, handing her the apple with a small smile. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep, rough with the kind of warmth that didn't match the coldness of the gossip around them. Anna hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but before she could, the whispering women carried on, their voices growing louder. "Wedding Saturday, I hear," one said, voice dripping with disdain. "Quick arrangement, but Thomas needs help with the farm." Anna's face flushed, and she quickly stood, her heart pounding in her chest. "Excuse me," the man said, his jaw tightening as he heard the news. "This girl's marrying her dead sister's husband?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. The women eyed him warily, but one of them snapped, "It's family business, stranger. None of your concern." The man's expression hardened, a quiet anger flaring in his eyes. "That's not right," he muttered, more to himself than to the women. He looked at Anna again, as though assessing her for the first time, his gaze softening. She felt an odd rush of warmth in her chest, a fleeting moment of understanding between them. Before she could say anything, the women moved off, leaving her standing there in the middle of the market. Anna's hands trembled, the weight of her situation pressing down on her again. She started to move away, but the man followed, stepping into the general store just behind her. She barely noticed him at first, too wrapped up in her own thoughts. She was looking at bolts of white fabric when he appeared beside her, his presence startling her out of her trance. He had an easy, confident air about him that made her feel both seen and invisible at the same time. "You need help with that?" he asked, gesturing to the fabric she was clutching. Anna opened her mouth to refuse, but then stopped herself. It wasn't his fault she was caught in this web of her family's making. He wasn't the one forcing her into a wedding she didn't want. But the fabric, it was for her wedding dress. Her mother had insisted. The thought of wearing it made Anna sick, and yet here she was buying it anyway, because it was expected. Her hand shook as she touched the smooth cloth. "It's for my wedding," she said quietly, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. He nodded, not looking surprised, though his gaze flickered with something like sympathy. "Wedding, huh?" he said, his voice thoughtful. "Sounds like a hell of a thing to be part of." "You don't know the half of it," Anna replied, her voice tight. She turned away from him, but not before catching the brief glance he exchanged with the shopkeeper. "Marco Hale," the shopkeeper said with a smile. "I heard you bought the Hutchinson place. Gonna make something of it." Marco, the man who had helped her with the apples, nodded. "Just getting some supplies for the ranch," he said, his tone casual, but there was a seriousness behind it, an unspoken weight that Anna could feel. The shopkeeper continued with small talk, but Anna barely heard him. She was too caught up in her own thoughts, the echoes of her family's demands still ringing in her ears. Marco moved to grab some ranch supplies, and Anna turned to the counter to pay for the fabric, her mind whirling. She didn't have time for small talk, didn't have time for anything other than figuring out how to escape this life that was being forced on her. She was trapped, suffocating under the weight of her family's expectations, their cold, unrelenting pressure. She was supposed to be Margaret's replacement, supposed to step into her sister's life without a thought for her own. But the thought of marrying Thomas, the man who had once called her sister his wife, was unbearable. She couldn't do it. She couldn't. As she paid for the fabric, Marco's eyes lingered on her for a moment. Then, as if deciding something, he stepped closer. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low, but there was something sincere in it, something that made her want to believe he actually cared. She forced a smile, but it felt hollow. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just fine." But Marco's expression softened, and he didn't say anything more. Instead, he picked up his ranch supplies and nodded at her, giving her a quick, respectful tip of his hat before turning to leave. Anna stood there for a moment, her breath shaky as she glanced down at the bolts of fabric. Her wedding dress. The thought made her sick. But when she looked up, Marco was already gone, his broad figure disappearing into the sunlight outside. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, the quiet strength in his presence. And for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Marco helped Anna with the heavy fabric bolts. Their hands brushed. "You all right, miss?" he asked gently. Anna's voice came out hollow. "I'm getting married Saturday." The way she said it, like a death sentence, made Marco's chest tighten. Something in him decided right then. He couldn't let this happen. The sun had begun to dip low in the sky when Anna stepped out of the store, her arms heavy with the white fabric she had just bought. Her mind was still tangled in the events of the day, the gossip in the market, the sight of her wedding dress, and the quiet sympathy in Marco's eyes. She felt his presence before she saw him. His figure loomed in the shadows near the edge of the porch, and when she turned to face him, his gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. "I've got the packages," he said simply, his voice soft, and for a moment, Anna felt an odd sense of relief. It wasn't often she had someone offer to help, let alone someone who seemed to understand her silence. Marco lifted the heavy fabric from her arms with ease, and as his hands brushed hers, she felt a spark of something she couldn't quite name. He didn't say anything more, but Anna felt the unspoken question hanging in the air, the one that had been gnawing at her ever since she'd met him. Why was he helping her? Why was he paying attention to a stranger in the first place? They walked in silence down the dirt street, the quiet hum of town life fading behind them as they neared the north road that led out of town. Marco kept his pace slow, never hurrying, as if giving her time to speak, to break the silence. When they reached the corner of the street, Anna stopped, suddenly aware of the weight of her decision. "I don't know why I'm here," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why I keep asking for help, why you're even offering it." Marco didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, his eyes steady. "Maybe you needed it," he said after a long pause. "Maybe you're tired of living a life someone else chose for you." Anna swallowed hard, her throat tight. She had never spoken these words aloud before, not to anyone, not even to herself. But now, in the presence of this stranger, everything felt more real, more urgent. "I didn't choose this," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't choose any of it. My family, they don't even see me. They see Margaret. They want me to be her, to take her place. And Thomas, he doesn't want me either. He never did." She stopped walking, her eyes staring straight ahead, seeing nothing. "I'm just a replacement. I'm nothing but a shadow." Marco stepped in front of her, his eyes softening. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing his words. "You're not a shadow," he said quietly, "and you're not a replacement." Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Marco hesitated, then spoke again, his tone gentle but firm. "What if you didn't have to be anyone's replacement?" He paused, letting the words sink in. "What if you had somewhere else to go? Somewhere far away from all of this?" Anna blinked, her heart skipping a beat. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't have any money. I don't have any way to get away from here. All I have is this dress, these fabrics, and this life that I'm stuck in." Marco didn't seem bothered by her confusion. He was calm, unwavering in his offer. "I need someone to help me on my ranch. I'm 2 days ride north up by the hills. It's quiet there, peaceful. You could have a fresh start. You wouldn't have to answer to anyone, be anyone's shadow. You'd have your own space, your own life." Anna shook her head, the weight of his words settling in. She felt a glimmer of hope rising, but it was quickly dashed by doubt. "I don't know anything about ranching. I don't know anything except cooking and cleaning and pretending to be someone I'm not." Marco's eyes softened with understanding, and he took a step closer to her. "Can you cook?" he asked gently. "Can you keep a house?" Anna nodded, though the words felt bitter on her tongue. "Yes, but what does that have to do with anything?" Marco smiled, a slight curve to his lips that was almost too faint to notice. "I need a housekeeper," he said simply. "Someone who knows how to take care of things, someone who's honest and hardworking. I don't need someone to be perfect. I just need someone who's willing to try." Anna stared at him, the offer hanging in the air like a lifeline she wasn't sure she could grasp. Could she trust him? Could she really walk away from everything and everyone she had ever known? Marco seemed to sense her hesitation, and he added quietly, "I leave at dawn tomorrow. The North Road, just past the edge of town. If you want to come, I'll be there. If not, I'll understand. But this is the only offer I can make." He tipped his hat to her, a small, respectful gesture, and then he turned, walking away toward his horse. Anna stood there for a long moment, staring after him, her thoughts racing. Was it really this simple? Was she truly free to leave? The thought of it terrified her, and yet the thought of staying, of going through with the wedding, felt like being suffocated. She knew she couldn't live her life as someone's replacement. She couldn't marry Thomas, not when every part of her screamed that it was wrong. But could she trust a stranger? Could she trust Marco Hale, a man she barely knew, with her future? The decision loomed before her like a storm, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She couldn't stay. She couldn't let herself be trapped forever. But what if she was making a mistake? The question nagged at her, even as she turned and hurried back to her room that night, her mind spinning with the possibilities of what lay ahead. Late that night, a pebble hit Anna's window. She rushed to the glass and saw Marco below on horseback, his figure outlined by the moonlight. "Dawn, North Road. The choice is yours, Anna." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the night. The first light of dawn filtered through Anna's bedroom window, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty room around her, the weight of the decision she had made pressing down on her chest. The wedding dress still hung in the corner, a ghost of what was supposed to be her future. The house felt too small, too suffocating, like a cage she had been trapped in for years, and now, after so many quiet nights of thinking about escape, she had finally found the courage to leave. She had spent the entire night packing, filling a small bag with a few things she could carry, some clothes, a few coins, and a locket Margaret had worn. The locket was the only thing that still felt like her sister, the only piece of her that hadn't been swallowed up by the grief and the expectations that everyone else had placed on her. As she stood up, Anna looked at the bed one last time, the place where Margaret had slept not long ago. She missed her sister more than she could put into words. But there was no time to mourn anymore. She had 6 days to make her own choice, and the only way out was through that door. She reached for the note she had written, the words that seemed so final. "I'm sorry. I cannot do this. Please forgive me. Anna." With a deep breath, she placed the note on the bed, then turned and left the room. The house was still silent. Her parents were asleep, unaware that their world was about to shift. Anna's footsteps were quiet on the wooden floor as she made her way down the stairs. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the door, but she hesitated for a moment, looking back over her shoulder. The house that had once been full of laughter and warmth now felt like a tomb. She didn't belong here anymore. She wasn't anyone's shadow. She wasn't Margaret's replacement. With a final glance at the house, Anna stepped outside into the cold morning air. The sky was still dark, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. As she made her way down the dirt path toward the north road, the weight of her decision settled on her like a heavy blanket. Every step felt both freeing and terrifying, like she was walking away from everything she had ever known, but towards something she couldn't quite see. The road stretched out in front of her, the familiar sights of the town slowly fading into the distance as the sun began to rise. She didn't look back. As she neared the edge of town, the silence was broken by the sound of hooves. Anna's heart skipped a beat, and she turned to see Marco riding toward her, leading his second horse. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a quiet determination, as though he had already made his decision. His presence felt like a lifeline in a world that had been drowning her. "You sure about this?" Marco asked, his voice steady but laced with something Anna couldn't quite place. She hesitated for a moment, looking at the horse, then back at the man who had offered her a way out. "More sure than I've been about anything," she replied, her voice firm, though her insides were a tangled mess of fear and hope. Marco didn't say anything else. He simply handed her the reins to the second horse, and without another word, they set off together, the world around them slowly coming to life as they rode north. The wind bit at Anna's face as they moved through the empty countryside, the landscape stretching out before them like a vast, open canvas. With each passing mile, she felt the weight of the life she had left behind grow smaller, as if the farther they went, the less it mattered. She could feel Marco's presence beside her, steady and quiet, like a rock in the midst of a storm. They rode in silence for hours, only stopping to rest the horses and share bread and water in the shade of a lone tree. Anna wasn't sure what to say, how to explain the turmoil that still churned inside her, but Marco seemed content to let the silence stretch between them. His eyes were focused on the horizon, and every so often, Anna caught a glimpse of the quiet sadness in them. He didn't ask her any questions, didn't prod for her story. He simply let her be, letting the miles pass without the weight of conversation hanging over them. As the day wore on, the landscape changed. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, and the air grew cooler. The sun was low in the sky by the time they stopped for the night, setting up camp near a stream. Marco started a small fire, and Anna watched him quietly as he worked. There was something about the way he moved, deliberate and calm, that made her feel like everything was okay, like they were moving towards something better. She sat on a nearby rock, her hands in her lap, still trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. It was all happening so fast, too fast. She hadn't even had time to think. But one thing was certain, she couldn't go back. Not to her father's demands, not to Thomas's passive acceptance, and not to the life that had never felt like hers to begin with. As the fire crackled, Marco sat down beside her, handing her a small tin plate with food. "Here," he said quietly, "you should eat." Anna took the plate, nodding her thanks, but she couldn't bring herself to touch the food. Her stomach was in knots, and the exhaustion from the ride was beginning to catch up with her. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I didn't mean to make things so difficult. I didn't mean to drag you into all of this." Marco looked at her, his expression soft. "You didn't drag me into anything," he said simply. "I'm here because it's right, and I don't regret it. Not for a second." Anna looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone understood. She felt seen, and that feeling, the feeling of not being alone, was worth more than she could put into words. That night, as they lay under the stars, Anna closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself relax. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, but for now, in this moment, she was free, and that was enough. As Marco's ranch appeared over the hill, Anna gasped. It was beautiful, sprawling, peaceful, built for a family but housing only ghosts. Marco helped her down from a horse. "Welcome home, Miss Anna," he said quietly, then added, "for as long as you need it." Anna looked at the house, then at the man who'd risked everything to save her. "Thank you," she whispered, but she wondered, had she traded one cage for another? The morning sun filtered through the trees as Anna awoke in the small room she now called her own. The soft light caught on the rough wooden beams overhead, and for the first time since Margaret's death, Anna didn't feel like a stranger in a place she didn't belong. The bed was simple, the sheets clean but worn, and the room sparse, with only a few small pieces of furniture. Nothing fancy, but everything in its place. She ran her fingers over the rough fabric of her blanket, feeling the softness of the moment, a moment she hadn't realized she'd been craving until now. She could hear the quiet sounds of the ranch outside, the distant clop of hooves, the rustle of wind through the trees. It was peaceful here. It felt different from the frantic, oppressive weight of her father's house, from the suffocating expectations of her family. Here, there was room to breathe, room to think. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, and the scent of wood smoke lingered in the air. As Anna stood and stretched, she noticed the warmth of the fire Marco had built in the hearth. He was already up, already working, and Anna couldn't help but admire the calm, deliberate way he moved, the steady rhythm of his life. It was nothing like the chaos of her family's farm. Nothing like the constant pressure to be perfect, to be the person everyone else needed her to be. It was a world away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Anna realized that she might be able to find a place in it, if she allowed herself to. When she walked into the kitchen, Marco was already seated at the table, his breakfast in front of him, his eyes scanning something in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something between them, a quiet understanding that neither had spoken aloud. Anna hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from him, unsure of what to say. But Marco didn't push her to talk. He simply smiled and set a plate of food in front of her. "You're up early," he said, his voice low and easy. "I thought I'd get an early start today," Anna replied softly. "There's a lot to be done around here." Marco nodded. "We'll get there. No rush. This place needs work, but it'll get done. One step at a time." Anna took a deep breath, the weight of everything she was leaving behind still settling inside her. But there was something comforting in Marco's words. Something steady. Something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could make a home here. For the next 2 weeks, Anna settled into the rhythm of the ranch. Every morning, she helped Marco with the animals, feeding the horses and the cattle, learning how to care for the land in ways she never had before. There were moments when it felt overwhelming, when the vastness of the ranch and the quiet isolation of it all made her feel small. But there were also moments of peace, like when she picked wildflowers from the meadow and arranged them in jars on the windowsills, or when she baked bread in the morning and shared a quiet breakfast with Marco. The two of them exchanging only a few words, but feeling the weight of the silence in a way that didn't need to be filled. It was enough. Slowly, Anna began to transform the house. She washed the windows, scrubbed the floors, and mended the small pieces of furniture that had been neglected for years. She started a small garden near the kitchen, planting vegetables and herbs. And as the days passed, the house seemed to come alive with a quiet energy, as if it, too, was beginning to remember what it felt like to be cared for. Marco watched her work, his eyes following her with a quiet appreciation. He didn't say much, but she could see the subtle changes in him, the way he relaxed when he came home to a warm meal and a clean house. There were still unspoken things between them, things they hadn't said aloud, but Anna felt them more deeply now than ever before. It was during these moments of quiet routine that she started to notice the way Marco looked at her, not with pity or obligation, but with something softer, something warmer. It was subtle at first, But it was there, in the way he smiled when she handed him his coat, or the way he paused for just a second longer than necessary when they passed each other in the hallway. And Anna began to wonder if there was more to this than just escaping from her family's demands. What if just maybe there was a place for her here that wasn't just about running away, but about starting something new? The evenings were quiet. Marco often sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the sun set over the hills. Anna would join him, sitting beside him in comfortable silence, both of them watching as the sky changed colors, the stars slowly appearing one by one. Sometimes they would talk about the ranch, about their lives before they had met. But most of the time, the silence was enough. Anna wasn't used to that kind of peace, but she was starting to crave it. She was starting to realize that maybe, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. One evening, as she prepared dinner, the familiar scent of Margaret's special stew recipe filled the house. It was the first time Anna had made it since Margaret had passed, and as the smell reached her nose, something in her chest tightened. The tears came without warning, the grief of losing her sister rushing to the surface. She had spent so long pushing it all down, burying the pain beneath the weight of everyone else's expectations. But in that moment, as the stew simmered on the stove, Anna allowed herself to feel it. She let the tears fall freely, her shoulders shaking with the quiet sobs. Marco, who had been working outside, came in quietly, his footsteps soft on the wooden floor. He didn't say anything at first, simply stood by the door, watching her as she cried. When she finally looked up, she saw him standing there, his expression awkward but sincere. "You don't have to forget her to move forward," Marco said gently, his voice thick with unspoken understanding. Anna nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I didn't realize how much I missed her until now." Marco came over and placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was both comforting and oddly intimate. "She would have wanted you to be happy, Anna. She would have wanted you to have your own life." Anna took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling inside her. For the first time, she began to feel like she could move forward, that maybe she wasn't alone, that maybe this life, this quiet ranch, was where she was meant to be. But as much as she tried to focus on the present, the past was never far behind. That night, after dinner, she sat by the window, staring out into the dark. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, the words he had said so many times before. "You need to do what's best for the family." But Anna realized for the first time that what was best for the family wasn't necessarily what was best for her. And maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the courage to choose what was best for herself. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the stars. In the yard below, Marco stood on the porch, looking at the same sky. Neither knew the other was awake, both thinking the same thing. Something between them was changing. And 3 days later, their fragile peace would be shattered by the sound of approaching horses. 3 weeks had passed since Anna's arrival at Marco's ranch, and the quiet rhythm of her new life had begun to feel normal, even comforting. She had settled into a routine that, while simple, filled her with a sense of purpose. The ranch was hard work, but it was honest, and for the first time, Anna didn't feel like she was just going through the motions of someone else's life. Marco had been patient with her, showing her the ways of the land, guiding her through the tasks that needed to be done. There was a growing sense of trust between them, though unspoken, and in the evenings, when they shared a quiet dinner, there was something more in the air, something fragile and tentative. Anna didn't dare put words to it, but she could feel it, and she thought Marco could too. But all of that was about to change. One morning, as Anna was in the garden pulling weeds, she heard the unmistakable sound of hooves approaching. At first, she thought it was nothing, the noise of the ranch blending with the sound of the wind. But then she saw him, a rider, moving swiftly down the dirt path toward the ranch. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized him. It was Thomas. Her stomach tightened, a cold shiver running through her as he drew nearer. She hadn't seen him since that fateful day when she had left, when he had stood by and let it all happen. He looked tired, worn down, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with him. When he dismounted, she saw the exhaustion in his face, the sorrow that he hadn't been able to hide. She froze, unsure of what to do, her body tensing instinctively. It had been 3 weeks, but the memories of those last days with him were still fresh. His silence, his reluctance, the way he had let her go without a fight. And now here he was, standing in front of her, as if nothing had changed. Marco appeared beside her, his presence steady and silent. He stepped in front of Anna, positioning himself between her and Thomas. There was no animosity in his stance, but there was an undeniable tension in the air, an unspoken challenge. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between Anna and Marco. "Your family's been searching," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "They're furious. They think I've taken you away, that you've been kidnapped. They've got the sheriff involved." Marco's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. "She worked for me. Honest employment. No kidnapping here." Thomas sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I told them I couldn't find you. I said I looked north, and there was nothing. But it's not going to be enough. They're determined to get you back. They've already talked to the sheriff." Anna's heart twisted in her chest. It was happening. The world she had fled from, the one she had worked so hard to escape, was catching up with her. And now, Thomas, the man she had once been bound to, was here, standing in front of her. But when he looked at her, when his eyes met hers, there was no anger, only an overwhelming sense of defeat. "I never wanted to marry you, Anna," Thomas said quietly, his voice raw with the weight of unspoken words. "I told your father it was wrong, but I didn't stop it. I just went along with it. And I'm sorry. I should have stopped it." Anna's chest tightened. The words, the apology, hit her harder than she had expected. It wasn't a confession she had wanted, but it was one she had needed to hear. She stood still, her gaze fixed on Thomas, trying to make sense of the emotions that swirled inside her. It was too late for apologies, too late to go back and undo everything that had already been said and done. But there was something in his voice, something that made her wonder if there had ever been a chance for them, or if their future had been doomed from the start. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I just wanted you to be happy, Anna. I thought it was the right thing to do, but I see now it wasn't. I see now that you don't belong with me. You never did." He paused, his eyes flickering to Marco, who was standing tall beside Anna. The unspoken tension between them was palpable. "Is she safe here?" Thomas asked, his voice quiet, almost resigned. Marco didn't flinch. "Safer than she'd ever be with your family," he replied firmly. Thomas nodded slowly, as if he knew the truth of Marco's words. "I'll tell them I couldn't find you," he said, his voice heavy. "I'll tell them I looked everywhere, but there's no sign of you. I won't force you to go back, but you need to know, your father won't stop looking. He'll keep searching until he finds you, and he'll make you come home, Anna." Thomas looked at her one last time, his expression full of regret. "I'm sorry for everything, Anna. I never wanted it to end this way." He turned and walked away, mounting his horse without another word. As the sound of his departure faded into the distance, Anna was left standing there, her mind spinning. "Why would he help me now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marco's eyes softened as he turned to face her. "Because he knows he failed you," Marco said quietly. "Because he knows you deserve more than what he could give you. And because, despite everything, he wants you to be happy." Anna was silent for a long moment, her thoughts racing. She had thought that Thomas's presence would feel like a betrayal, like the final piece of the puzzle she had been running from. But it didn't. It felt like closure. It felt like the end of a chapter she had been trying to escape. Marco stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on her arm. "I made you a target by bringing you here," he said, his voice low, the weight of his words sinking in. "But I knew the risk when I offered. I'll protect you, Anna. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not now, not ever." Anna nodded, her chest tightening with emotion. "I know," she whispered, "but it's not just about them anymore. It's about me, Marco. It's about the life I want to build. And I think I'm ready to build it here with you." The words hung between them, fragile and full of meaning. Before either of them could say anything more, the sound of approaching hooves shattered the moment. More riders were coming. Marco's hand instinctively moved to the rifle by the door, but Anna didn't back down. She stood her ground. "I'm done hiding," she said quietly, her voice firm. Marco's eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. But when the riders came into view, Anna knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, she had made her choice. Marco and Anna turned toward the approaching dust cloud. At least 5 horses. Marco's hand moved to the rifle by the door. "Get inside," he said quietly. But Anna stood firm. "No, I'm done hiding." As the riders emerged from the dust, Anna's stomach dropped. Her father, the preacher, the sheriff, and 3 men from town. They found her, and they'd brought the law. The riders appeared in the distance, their silhouettes growing larger as they neared the ranch, the sound of hooves thundering across the dirt. Marco stood still, his hand resting lightly on the rifle, his eyes scanning the group of men approaching. Anna's stomach tightened, and her chest felt hollow. She had known this day would come, had known the moment she had chosen to leave that there would be no escaping her father's wrath. But even though she had prepared for it, nothing could ease the rush of fear and uncertainty that flooded her now. She could see the dust clouds swirling behind them, hear the faint voices of her father and the preacher, and at the head of the group, the sheriff. Her heart beat faster, each thud like a drum urging her to flee, to run, to do anything but face them. Marco's voice cut through the tension, calm and steady. "Get inside," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the riders as they drew closer. But Anna didn't move. She didn't back away. She stood tall, rooted in the moment. "No, I'm done hiding," she said firmly, her voice barely above a whisper, but full of strength. Marco's gaze flickered to her, his expression unreadable, but something in the way his shoulders relaxed told her he understood. She was no longer the frightened girl who had left her father's house in the dead of night. She wasn't someone's replacement, and she wasn't anyone's property. She was Anna, and for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path. As the riders approached, she could feel the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her again. She could already hear her father's angry voice, could already see the scorn in her mother's eyes. But she didn't look away. She stood her ground, refusing to let the past swallow her whole. Marco stepped slightly to the side, his posture protective, but he didn't interfere. This was Anna's fight now, and though he would stand beside her, she was the one who had to face her past. The riders came to a halt just short of the porch, the dust settling around them like a blanket of tension. Anna's father dismounted first, his face red with fury, his eyes blazing with anger. "Anna," he shouted, his voice cutting through the stillness of the morning. "You will come home immediately. This madness has gone on long enough." His voice cracked with frustration, the years of control slipping away as he finally gave voice to the anger he had been holding in check. "You don't belong here. You're not meant to be with this man. You're my daughter, and you'll do as I say." Anna's heart pounded in her chest, the words like poison to her ears. She had heard this her entire life, the demands, the expectations. But now it didn't hurt. It didn't have the power it once had. Marco's quiet voice broke the silence. "She doesn't belong to you anymore, sir. Anna is her own person now, and she makes her own choices." The sheriff, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the situation. "Ma'am," he said, his tone calm but firm, "there have been accusations of kidnapping. Your family's concerned, and I've been asked to bring you back to town. It's not right for a woman to be living alone with a man like this, unwed and unprotected." Anna's father sneered at the sheriff's words, nodding in agreement. "Exactly. This isn't right. The whole town is talking, and now the sheriff is involved. There's a reputation to protect. His gaze turned to Marco, then back to Anna. And you, he spat, you've dishonored this family. This whole situation has embarrassed us all. I've tried to be patient, but I won't stand for it any longer. You're coming home with me, and that's final. Anna felt her legs weaken beneath her, but she didn't let them buckle. She stood taller, more resolute than she had ever been before. I'm not going with you, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. I won't go back to that life. You never asked me what I wanted. You never cared about my happiness, only about your own reputation. And I'm done with it. I'm done with being your pawn. Her father's face twisted in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. You ungrateful child, he yelled, his hand shaking with rage. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By running off with some rancher? Marco didn't flinch at the insult. He stood by Anna, his expression hard but unwavering. Anna's not running off, he said, his voice low but full of conviction. She's choosing her own future. You may not like it, but that's her right. Anna's father took a step forward, his hand raised as though to strike her. Anna's breath caught in her throat, but Marco was there, stepping between them in an instant. You will not touch her, Marco said, his voice cold, his hand on his rifle. Not here. Not ever again. Anna's father's face darkened, his fists clenching. By what right do you interfere? He spat, his eyes narrowing. You're nothing but a hired hand, a drifter. You have no say in this. Marco's gaze never wavered. I've got more say than you think, he said quietly, his voice calm, but full of a quiet power. Anna's heart raced in her chest as she looked between Marco and her father. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. She could go back to her family, to the life they had planned for her, where she could choose the life she wanted, the life she had fought so hard to create. The preacher, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his expression conflicted. Anna, he said softly, this is wrong. You should come back with your father. There's no shame in returning to your family. Anna looked at him, and for the first time, she understood. It's wrong, she said quietly, to force someone to live a life they don't want. It's wrong to make a woman be someone she's not. Margaret wouldn't want me to be a replacement, and I won't be one. The preacher hesitated, then looked at her father, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. You've raised her to be strong, sir, but sometimes strength means letting go. Anna's father didn't respond. He simply stood there, his chest heaving with frustration and anger as the weight of the situation sank in. You're being hysterical, he muttered, his voice shaky with fury. But Anna wasn't listening anymore. She had made her choice. She turned to Marco, her hand reaching out to him. I choose him, she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. I choose this life. I choose myself. Marco took her hand in his grip warm and firm. I won't trap you, Anna. Not after I've freed you from one cage, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you this. If you choose me, I'll always ask you what you want. And I'll respect you, always. Anna looked at her father one last time, her heart heavy but resolute. I'm not your daughter anymore, she said quietly, her voice full of finality. You disinherited me the moment you tried to force me into a life I didn't choose. Her father's eyes flared with rage, but there was nothing more to say. He turned away, muttering curses under his breath, and the rest of the men followed him, leaving the ranch in a cloud of dust. Anna stood with Marco, her hand in his, and for the first time, she felt truly free. The preacher, who had stayed behind, surprised Anna by stepping forward. I'll marry you too, he said quietly, his voice steady. This was wrong before, but now it's right. Marco looked at Anna, his eyes full of tenderness, and she nodded. Yes, she whispered, let's do it. The preacher began the ceremony, and as the sun sank below the horizon, Marco and Anna were married on the porch of the ranch, with only the wind and the setting sun as witnesses. It was simple And it was perfect. As the ceremony ended, Marco leaned down to kiss Anna, and the world seemed to stop for a moment, the weight of their journey together settling around them. The life they had chosen, one filled with respect, love, and freedom, was just beginning. Later that evening, as Anna lay in Marco's arms, the faintest smile curved on her lips. "Do you ever regret the trouble I brought?" she asked softly. Marco kissed her forehead, his voice full of quiet conviction. "Every day I'm grateful I was in that market when you needed someone," he said. Anna touched Margaret's locket at her neck, feeling its weight, but no longer its burden. "She would have liked you," she whispered. Marco smiled. "I hope so, because I plan on loving her sister the rest of my life." They stood together, watching the stars, no longer weighed down by the past. And as the night stretched on, Anna knew one thing. This was the best choice either of them had ever made.